Jeff, what did we learn in this first full day of the Harris campaign?
Well, we learned that she can raise a lot of money in a very short amount of time. And that certainly showed that the enthusiasm gap that was lacking at the end of President Biden's campaign has come back in a wave of enthusiasm in just the last 24 hours. Money isn't everything, but it's definitely a sign of support, and it's a sign of momentum. And that's a big figure that she raised today. You also heard from her remarks at the campaign headquarters in Wilmington, a little bit of her sort of sense of the race and sense of the opposition. A lot of people I've spoken to before Vice President Harris took over at the top of well, she's not quite at the top of the ticket yet, but took over after President Biden stepped aside, have been saying they think that Vice President Harris can prosecute the case against Donald Trump. And she certainly used that language today at the campaign, talking very specifically about her background as a prosecutor, talking about her time as Attorney General, and listing the sort of weaknesses that she sees in former President Trump, which were weaknesses that you did not see President Biden prosecuting from the debate stage 3 weeks ago. So it's a seismic shift for the Democrats. It's a seismic shift for the campaign. It doesn't mean that she's got a glide path to the White House. She's got a lot of work to do yet, and certainly a lot of people who aren't convinced yet, but she's had a very fast start in the last 24 hours.
Simone, VP Harris leaned into her record as a prosecutor during those remarks she gave in Wilmington. What do you think of that strategy?
Look, I think it's a smart strategy. I remember back to then candidate Harris, Senator Harris's first presidential campaign, where she started off talking about that she was a progressive prosecutor, and then they cycled through these different things in that campaign, and they landed on a version of what you heard in that clip. The vice president used to say back on the campaign trail, she would have some version that said, I was an elected prosecutor. I know a rap sheet when I see one. I know a criminal when I see one. Let me read you his rap sheet. So this is the vice presidential elevated version of that. I remember when we were prepping for the vice presidential debate in 2020 against Mike Pence, and the attacks about being a prosecutor and crime were very high around that time, not just for then candidate Kamala Harris, but also Democrats across the board, right? That was around the time of folks talking about defund the police, Democrats saying, oh, should we lean away from law enforcement? And it was then candidate Biden and then Senator Harris that decided to lean in. And if you look back at that vice presidential debate, when Mike Pence tried to come at her with criticism, she said, I'm not going to be lectured by someone like you on this stage about law enforcement. I've spent my career as a law enforcement officer, as the top prosecutor in California, and that matters. And so you juxtapose that against Donald Trump, who does have a rap sheet that's long, if I may say. It's tailor-made. I think she was truly tailor-made for this moment, given all of the issues that will come to a head in this race.
Jennifer, let's talk about flipping the switch. We saw Nancy Pelosi come out and endorse Vice President Harris today. Young Democratic rising stars all over TV supporting her. How big of a contrast is what we have seen in the last 48 hours to what we've seen in the last month from Democrats?
Yeah, I mean, it is. And I thought that that's one of the reasons why the event today in Wilmington was so important, is because you saw like the sort of Biden-Harris campaign family coming together, president being on the phone, being so gracious to the vice president. I'm clearly really proud of her. And you saw, the vice president is keeping the campaign leadership sort of intact with Julia Chavez Rodriguez and Jen O'Malley Dillon staying there, too. And you could see that this is a team that's united, and thought it was a great way for the team to be united. And plus, and then you see all the Democrats lining up behind her, too. And what it feels to me like, Stephanie, is that the 2024 campaign has finally started. If you think about the last 6 months, we really have just been focused on Donald Trump and his court cases and his conviction. There's been so much that's happened in the last month, but I think his conviction was just a little over a month ago. And then we had the debate, right? And then the focus has been on Democrats' concerns about whether or not President Biden was the right person to carry on. And now you see really a phenomenal candidate, a ton of energy, a great argument to make about the critique that she's able to make about Trump as a candidate, and then also a vision for the future. And you're like, okay, let's go. You know, you feel like this is finally starting. And that's what I think the energy, the $81 million, I mean, almost 900,000 donors, that is, you know, that just shows the hunger in the country to beat Trump.
Jeff, you wrote a piece saying it would be a historic gamble if Democrats nominate Harris because she would have to overcome massive racism, massive sexism. How much is that being talked about behind closed doors?
Well, and the headline, as you rightly said, was the historic gamble, because if you look at history, in the more than 200 years of the U.S. democracy, American voters have elected a black person once. That was Barack Obama, and they've never elected a woman. So certainly sexism and racism are issues that Vice President Harris will have to tackle or will be a challenge anyway for her as she seeks to break the highest glass ceiling in the political world of the United States. That said, the people around Vice President Harris will say this is something she's dealt with her whole career. She's been a trailblazer and broken barriers as a woman and as a Black and South Asian woman before in all of the previous offices that she's held. So this is nothing new. But the reality is it is something that she'll have to face, and it is a part of the equation for the election in 2024.
Jennifer, let's go back to that fundraising haul. 81 million bucks in 24 hours. What do those numbers tell you?
It's just it's historic. It's phenomenal. As I said before, the actual numbers of donors, to have almost 900,000, almost 1 million people to donate in that short amount of time. It shows that there is a real hunger, right? I think we know there's a big anti-Trump coalition. You had a sense that if there was somebody else at the top of the ticket, that might sort of uncork that kind of energy, and that really that's happened in a historic way. And as somebody who worked on for the first time a woman was the nominee on a presidential campaign, and about the sexism and racism that the vice president faced, it's not what the vice president will face; it's what the vice president has faced. Jeff said that her team talks about how she's faced this her whole career. Let's remember what she's done. She's been a prosecutor, attorney general in the biggest state of the country, senator in the biggest state of the country, vice president, and hopefully now president. So she's been dealing that with her whole life. And I think that part of being vice president is a tough thing because you don't get covered a lot, and when you do, it can be the circumstances are usually not in your favor. And so I think what people are now, the campaign has 4 weeks, right, from now to the convention, to be able to reintroduce herself to the American people and really see her whole bio, everything she's done as vice president, what she's done prior to that. She's one of the more remarkable figures in American politics today. And so you also have not just excitement about an anti-Trump coalition, but a really compelling story to tell, and a good month runway for the Democratic convention to do that.
Simone, let's talk about big donors, because all sorts of big donors have been unhappy for weeks. Many were calling on President Biden to step aside. He did. They got their way. What is the sentiment out there now? And is there a risk that they think they've got more power, more control than they actually do, but seeing that they just got their way, that could change the way they see things?
Well, it could, couldn't it, Steph? Look, I talked to a lot of people who I think in the immediate aftermath of the president's announcement that he is no longer going to seek the nomination, and then his endorsement of Vice President Harris, there has been a lot of excitement within the Democratic Party apparatus. And frankly, what I've heard from folks is that they are relieved that the family business is no longer being, dragged across and splashed across newspapers and television all over the country. However, while everyone is excited, and I think we're going to move, we're going to move past the sheer shock of what has happened first, and then start talking more and more about the campaign and the nitty gritty and the apparatus. There is this sense that what some folks have called elites, I don't like to use that term because it wasn't just some random donors in a back room conspiring, right? But there were a lot of donors who care about the Democratic Party, who care about democracy, who said, we don't want Joe Biden. And those donors did play a role in calling up members of Congress, delegates, voters, right, party officials, and making their voices heard. But it was not just them. So I think as the excitement continues to roll on and the business continues to get done, Democrats do need to make sure that there is a pause and a reflection moment here. Because the next time you decide that, it's going to be a little bit harder to do the work for your candidate, or it looks a little treacherous down the path, I hope that people do not think that this is a run-of-the-mill situation where folks can band together and push their nominee off of, or attempt to push their nominee off of the ticket. And I like to say, God bless Joe Biden. He's a better man than just about every politician I know. And a very, 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 very good person who has sat there on that phone today and said he's going to work his heart out because he loves Kamala Harris, he loves this country, and he's going to continue to do his job.